I never imagined the first warm Saturday of June would bring anything more exciting than pruning rose bushes and scrubbing pollen off the porch rail. Life had settled into a quiet rhythm after my husband passed 3 years ago, a rhythm of morning walks, folded laundry, and the occasional book club meeting. Predictable, safe, and honestly, a little hollow. That morning, I was elbow deep in the soil replanting marigolds along the front walkway. The sun had just crested over the rooftops, and the air still carried that soft, hopeful scent of summer beginnings. I remember standing up to stretch, brushing dirt from my knees when I heard the rumble of a car engine slowing to a stop next door. It was an older blue SUV with one door slightly misaligned. I recognized it immediately. The same car I used to see pulling in every weekend when Clara's son came home from school. But it had been more than a year since I last saw him. Back then, he was just a lanky high school senior with messy hair and a quiet smile. Now, as the driver's door opened, a taller, broader-shouldered version of that memory stepped out. His hair was shorter, sun-lightened, his posture straighter, more assured. I blinked. Was that really him? "Hey, Ms. Whitaker?" His voice reached me with an easy warmth as he pulled a backpack from the passenger seat. "Liam," I called back, shading my eyes with my hand. He grinned and walked closer. "Yeah, it's me. Just got back from upstate for the summer." I laughed, a little breathless. "I barely recognized you. You've grown a bit." He shrugged playfully. "College food and stress, I guess." I watched him for a moment, still surprised by how different yet familiar he seemed. Liam used to mow my lawn when he was 15. I'd give him lemonade and remind him to wear sunscreen. Now, here he was, standing taller than me with that same easy grin, but something else in his eyes, something settled older. "Well, welcome back," I said, brushing my hands on my jeans. "Your mom must be thrilled." "She is. Already has me cleaning out the garage," he said, rolling his eyes with a smile. "But I'm glad to be home." The breeze picked up and ruffled the edge of my blouse. For a moment, we just stood there, the quiet between us, not uncomfortable, just unexpected. He glanced toward my porch. "You still make that mint iced tea?" I raised an eyebrow. "Only for special guests." "Well, I guess I better earn it then," he said, his smile softening. "Mind if I drop by later? I'd like to catch up." I hesitated only a beat before nodding. "Of course. I'll have some ready." He gave a little wave and turned back toward his house, and I stood there for a while longer, watching the light shift across the lawn. Something had stirred, something I didn't yet have words for. But I knew this: I was no longer just looking at Clara's boy. That evening, I set the porch table with 2 glasses and a pitcher of tea chilled just enough to sweat through the glass. The air was thick with honeysuckle, and the cicadas had begun their nightly chorus. I'd changed into a soft cotton dress, nothing fancy, just something I hadn't worn in a while. When Liam appeared at the gate, I was both nervous and oddly calm. "Evening," he said, stepping up onto the porch like he belonged there. "Evening," I echoed, pouring him a glass. "Still sweet, just how you liked it." He took a sip and sighed. "Perfect." We talked for over an hour. About college, his photography class, his awkward dorm roommate. I told him about my garden projects and the new book club member who wouldn't stop quoting Virginia Woolf. We laughed more than I'd expected. But underneath it, there was a hum, a sense that something unsaid was weaving between our words. "You know," he said, as the fireflies began to show themselves in the darkening yard, "you haven't changed much." I looked at him, startled. "I'm pretty sure I have." He shook his head, serious now. "You still have this calm. Like being here. Feels like breathing." I didn't know what to say to that. My heart tightened, not in discomfort, but recognition. Something in me responded to his words in a way that surprised me. Not like a mother, not like a neighbor. Just a woman. A person who hadn't felt seen in a long, long time. "Thank you," I said quietly. That means more than you know. We sat in silence after that. Not awkward, just full. Then gently he stood. I should get going, he said. But I meant what I said. You're still you, and I'm really glad to see you again. Me too, Liam. I said, my voice just above a whisper. And as he stepped down from the porch and disappeared into the night, I realized I wasn't thinking about what was appropriate or expected. I was only thinking about how, for the first time in years, I was looking forward to tomorrow. The next morning, I found myself standing at the kitchen window, far longer than necessary coffee cooling between my palms. I watched a robin hop along the fence, then a squirrel dart up the elm. The world outside carried on quiet and steady, yet inside I felt unsettled, not in a bad way, but in a way that made me more aware of the softness in my breath, the warmth lingering from the night before. I hadn't felt this in a long time, that low hum of anticipation. After breakfast, I wandered around the house looking for things to tidy that didn't need tidying. I rearranged the books on the hallway shelf, dusted a vase that hadn't collected dust, changed my top twice. Finally, I settled on a soft green blouse and jeans that felt casual but intentional. I told myself it was just comfort. I wasn't expecting anything. Really. The knock came a little before 11. When I opened the door, Liam stood there holding a small bakery box and a familiar smile. I brought scones, he said, lifting the box slightly. And I promise I didn't make them myself. I laughed, stepping aside. You're braver than me. I haven't baked in weeks. That can't be true, he said, walking into the kitchen like he'd done it 100 times. Your house always smelled like cinnamon or vanilla or something better than whatever we had at the dining hall. He set the box down and leaned against the counter while I got plates and made fresh tea. There was something comfortable in the way he fit into the space, like he hadn't been gone for a year, like we hadn't missed a beat. We sat by the window again, sun filtering through the curtain lace. He talked about his photography class, how he'd started seeing light differently, how shadows told stories. I listened, fascinated, not just by what he said, but by how he said it, like he was letting me into a world he rarely showed others. I've been thinking about coming back after college, he said at one point. His fork paused midair. Really? I asked, surprised. I thought you'd want to explore. I do, he said, setting the fork down gently. But there's something about home that's starting to mean more. Maybe it's the quiet, or maybe it's who's still here. He looked at me then, and I felt that familiar tightening in my chest. Not panic, not confusion, just that stirring again, that quiet realization that something was growing slowly, and neither of us had planted it on purpose. Liam, I said gently, you're still figuring everything out? You should. I am, he said. But figuring things out doesn't mean running from what matters. I didn't know how to respond to that. So I stood and began rinsing the dishes. He joined me without asking, like it was the most natural thing in the world. He passed me a plate, and our fingers brushed. Just a touch, just for a second. But it lingered more than I expected. Thanks for the tea, he said, drying his hands on a towel. Thanks for the scones, I replied. He turned to me quieter now. Can I ask you something? Of course. Did you ever think you'd feel something new? At this point in your life, I looked at him, unsure how to answer. I think I stopped expecting anything new. He nodded slowly, as if that answer told him more than I meant it to. I'll see you tomorrow, he asked. I nodded, and he leaned in, not to kiss me. Not quite, but close enough that I could feel the warmth of his breath before he stepped back. And when the door closed, I leaned against the counter, heart still steady but undeniably changed. The next day was bright and cool, the kind of summer morning that begged for movement. I'd barely stepped onto my porch with a glass of lemon water when Liam called out from his yard. "Hey, want to walk with me? Just around the block?" I hesitated for half a breath before nodding. "Sure. Let me grab my shoes." We set off at an easy pace, the quiet rhythm of our footsteps matching the steady hum of lawnmowers and wind chimes drifting from porches. It was strange walking beside him like that, like we were equals. Not the woman who used to wave from her garden while he biked by. But something else now. Companions, maybe. He asked me questions, real ones. About my job before retirement. About the cross-country trip I once took in my 20s. About my favorite books, my favorite mistakes. And he listened, not out of politeness, but as if every answer mattered. "You don't talk like anyone my age," he said as we turned a corner shaded by tall oaks. "Is that a compliment or a warning?" I teased. He grinned. "Both, probably, but mostly a compliment." I glanced at him sideways. "You don't talk like someone your age either." We walked in silence for a moment, and I could feel the words gathering in him before he said them. "I think I always looked up to you, even when I didn't realize it." "That's sweet," I said softly. "No, I mean—" He paused, searching. "Back then, I didn't know why I always found myself hoping you'd come outside while I mowed the lawn, or why I'd linger when you offered lemonade. It wasn't just the lemon bars. I felt something shift between us. He wasn't saying this to be bold. He wasn't testing a boundary. He was simply being honest. "Liam," I said carefully, "you were a teenager. It's natural to, I know." I was, and maybe it was just a feeling I didn't understand. But now, he stopped walking and turned toward me. "Now I think I understand it better. And I'm not saying this to make things complicated. I just want you to know I see you." I opened my mouth to respond, but nothing came right away. So instead, I just looked at him. Really looked. At the sincerity in his eyes. At the way he stood not like a boy with a crush, but a man offering truth. "I see you too," I said finally. His shoulders relaxed just a little. We finished the loop around the block and stopped in front of my gate. The air was warm now, but not heavy. "I'll be at my mom's most of the afternoon," he said, "helping with the shed." "Sounds fun." "It won't be," he said with a smirk. "But maybe later I can stop by if you're up for it." "I will be," I said, and meant it. He smiled, then added, "Don't wait for me, though. You've got a life, too." I watched him walk back across the lawn, and for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like someone watching from the sidelines. The sky darkened faster than expected that afternoon. One moment, the sun filtered through the kitchen blinds, warming the countertops. The next, clouds had gathered like a silent audience above the neighborhood. I was slicing peaches when the first drops hit the window, fat, deliberate taps that quickly turned into a steady downpour. I didn't think Liam would come by in weather like this. But just after 4, there was a knock at the door. He stood there, slightly wet curls damp at the edges, holding a brown paper bag close to his chest. "Didn't want to waste the walk," he said, grinning. "I brought cookies." I stepped aside, letting him in. "Your mom's shed project end early?" "She kicked me out once the thunder started," he said, slipping off his shoes. "Said I was more in the way than helpful." We sat in the living room while the rain drummed steadily against the windows. The scent of the storm drifted through the screen door, earthy and familiar. I poured us both tea and unwrapped the cookies, chocolate chip with a hint of sea salt. Homemade, I could tell. "You made these?" I asked, surprised. "I did," he said. "Don't laugh." "I needed a new hobby last winter." "I'm not laughing. I'm impressed." He leaned back into the couch, quiet for a while, and then said, "Can I ask something personal?" "Of course. What was your husband like?" The question caught me off guard, not because it was intrusive, but because no one had asked in a long time. Most people either tiptoed around the subject or assumed there was nothing left to say. He was gentle, I said after a pause. Funny in a quiet way. Loved crossword puzzles. Hated small talk. Liam nodded, waiting. But toward the end, we became distant. Not angry, just apart. Like roommates more than partners. He didn't speak, just listened, which made it easier to continue. I think grief doesn't always come with heartbreak. Sometimes it's just the loss of a version of yourself you didn't realize you missed. He was silent for a long time before saying, "That makes a lot of sense." I looked at him. "What about your dad?" "You never talk about him." He exhaled slowly, gaze fixed on the window. "He left when I was 9. No note, just gone. Mom did everything. And I guess..." I stopped asking why. I reached for his hand, not thinking, just instinct. He didn't flinch. He just let mine rest there like it belonged. "You know," I said quietly, "we carry more than we realize." He looked at me, then really looked. "That's why being here matters to me. Not just home. Here. With you." The storm outside seemed to soften as he said it, as if the world paused just long enough for the meaning to land. Neither of us moved to change the moment. We just sat there, our hands still touching the space between us, filled not with questions, but understanding. The next morning unfolded slow and soft, with a pale sky and the gentle hush that comes after a night of rain. I was reading on the back deck, a half-empty mug of coffee cooling beside me, when Liam texted, "Want to walk around the lake today?" I stared at the message longer than I needed to. It wasn't unusual. Not anymore. And yet, something about it felt different. Like this wasn't just a walk. I typed back, "Sure, just let me change." An hour later, we were strolling the narrow gravel path that curved around the lake's edge. The water was still broken only by the occasional ripple of a dragonfly or a distant splash from a duck near the reeds. We didn't talk at first. It wasn't uncomfortable. It was companionable. Peaceful. He was the one who broke the silence. "I used to come here when I was a kid," he said. "Usually when I didn't want to be at home. You never told me that. I didn't think it mattered back then. But now, I think about how many times I walked past your house. How many times I thought about knocking even when I didn't have a reason." I glanced at him. "You were just a kid." "Yeah, but even then you felt like a safe place. Not because you were older or lived next door. It was something else. Something I couldn't name until now." My heart thudded a little faster. He stopped walking, hands in his pockets, his gaze fixed on the water. "I don't want you to think this is some fleeting thing. That I'm just confused or chasing a feeling." "I don't," I said quietly. "But I do wonder what it is you're feeling." He turned toward me, and his voice was steady but full of quiet conviction. "That you make me feel more grounded than anyone else ever has. That when I'm with you, I'm not trying to prove anything. I'm just me. And that scares me a little. But it also feels more real than anything else in my life right now." I looked away, unsure of what to say. Not because I didn't believe him, but because I did. "I never expected this," I said after a long pause. "Not from you, not from anyone." "I know," he said gently. "And I'm not asking for anything right now. Just a chance. A beginning." We stood there for a moment, the breeze ruffling the leaves above us, the scent of wet earth all around. I thought about how many years I had spent locking pieces of myself away to be practical, to be safe. And now here was this young man standing before me, not with answers, but with honesty. I reached out, brushing a bit of hair from his forehead without thinking. My hand lingered there for just a second. "Okay," I whispered. "Let's see where this goes." He didn't smile big. He didn't pull me into anything. He just nodded once, like we'd made an agreement that didn't need embellishment. And we continued walking, not as neighbors, not as something scandalous, just two people who had chosen to stop pretending. That evening, I set the table for two. Nothing extravagant, just pasta with roasted vegetables, a bottle of chilled white wine, and a candle I hadn't lit in over a year. I told myself it was just for ambiance, that the evening breeze warranted a little softness. But deep down, I knew I was preparing for more than a meal. Liam arrived just before 7, wearing a navy button-up with the sleeves rolled to his elbows. His hair was still damp from a shower, and he carried a bouquet of wildflowers wrapped in brown paper. "I didn't know what to bring," he said sheepishly. "These felt right." "They are," I said, taking them. "They're perfect." Dinner passed in easy conversation, a mixture of light jokes and thoughtful questions. We talked about old movies, favorite meals, the songs that made us feel something even when we didn't know why. And slowly the gaps between words grew more comfortable, the pauses filled with something tender. After we finished, I stood to clear the plates, but he reached out gently, taking one from my hands. "Let me help." We moved in quiet coordination at the sink, the kitchen filled with the soft sounds of water and clinking dishes. At one point, our shoulders brushed. I didn't step away. Neither did he. When we were done, I poured us both another glass and led him to the living room. We sat on the couch, a little closer than before, the candlelight flickering shadows against the walls. "I used to wonder what it would be like to have moments like this," he said softly. "Just simple and real." I looked at him. "With someone like me," he didn't flinch. "Exactly with someone like you." There was a vulnerability in his voice that disarmed me. It wasn't just attraction, it was presence, intention. "I think I stopped believing in this kind of connection," I said. "I thought maybe it wasn't meant for me anymore." And now he asked. I hesitated, but only briefly. Now I'm not so sure I was right. He turned toward me, then his eyes searching his hand resting close to mine on the cushion between us. He didn't reach for me, not completely, but he didn't have to. The energy in the room shifted thick with unspoken things. I felt it in the way my breath slowed, in the stillness that wrapped around us like something sacred. "I'm not in a rush," he said. "I just want to be here, with you, as you are." My hand found his, then slowly, deliberately. Our fingers laced together without hesitation, like they'd done it 1,000 times before in some other life. And in that quiet, with the cicadas humming faintly through the window screen and the last of the light slipping beneath the horizon, I allowed myself to lean into him. Not out of weakness, not out of longing, but because it felt like the truest thing I'd done in years. The next morning began with soft sunlight spilling through my kitchen windows, catching on the rim of the coffee cup I'd set down but forgotten to drink. I stood barefoot on the cool tile floor, staring out at the quiet street, unsure how long I'd been still. My house felt different. Not changed exactly, but warmer. Like something long asleep had stirred and stretched and was now watching the world with new eyes. At a little past 9, there was a knock on the door. I didn't jump this time. I just smiled. Liam stood there holding 2 paper cups and a small brown bakery bag. "Hazelnut for you," he said, lifting one of the cups. "Black for me. And I may or may not have gotten extra scones." "Smart move," I said, stepping back to let him in. We moved around each other in the kitchen like it was routine, like we'd done it for years. He opened a drawer to get napkins without asking. I reached into the cabinet for plates and didn't have to explain where they were. We took our coffee to the deck. The morning air was mild and the birds were still busy in the hedges. Neither of us rushed the conversation. It wasn't about big declarations anymore. We'd already crossed that line, not loudly, not dramatically, but in the quiet of shared space, shared silence, and shared truth. At one point, he turned to me and said, "I told my mom I've been spending time with you." I looked at him carefully. "What did she say?" She raised an eyebrow, then shrugged. "Said she's always known you were special." I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. She didn't ask questions. She asked if I was happy. I told her yes. He looked down at his coffee for a moment, then added, I'm not trying to prove anything to anyone. Not her, not the world. Just to you. That I'm here. That this is real. I reached over and placed my hand on his firm and sure. You don't have to prove it, I said. I feel it. We sat like that for a while, hands resting lightly, eyes watching the trees sway. The world outside didn't stop or slow down, but something in me had. For years, I had convinced myself that the best chapters of my life had already been written. That companionship was a memory and connection was something I was meant to witness from afar, not experience again. But then came Liam, unexpected, quiet, persistent in his presence, reminding me that the heart doesn't understand timelines or social expectations. It simply knows when it feels seen. Later, as we finished our coffee and began stacking the dishes, he turned to me with that same calm sincerity that had marked every step of this strange, beautiful unfolding. I'm not going anywhere, Elaine, unless you ask me to. I looked at him, at this young man who had once been just a neighbor's boy, and now stood before me with steady hands and an open heart. I'm not asking you to go, I said. And with that, we stepped into the rest of the day, not as something hidden or uncertain, but as two people who had chosen quietly and deliberately to begin again. Not everything in life makes sense. Not every path is predictable, but sometimes the most unexpected turns bring you back to yourself, to the part of you you thought was lost, waiting in someone else's gaze to be found again.